dans les réponses.
Oui, oui, je suis d'accord.
Parce que sinon, c'est trop chaud.
So, I think we're going to start if everybody's seated. So, thank you for being here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the editor-in-chief of Les Echos, the French newspaper, for those who don't know this publication, and I'm probably the only one in the room that is not an expert on technology, so I apologize for my very simple questions that I will try to raise to our guest today. I'm joined by Olivier Frous, who is VP at Thales, and in particular in charge of digital transformation. Luigi Rebuffi, who is a European Organization for Security CEO, and General Bruno Maurice, who left the military a few months ago and who is now an expert on digital. To talk about this issue of digital sovereignty, it's of course it's a critical issue. It's vast, and we'll have maybe 45 minutes of discussion, and then we'll open up for questions. I'm sure you have many questions. But to start with, I would like to ask the General, maybe your definition of digital sovereignty from a military perspective.
Thank you very much indeed. That is a complex question, but I will give my answer as a former military. First of all, I would like to quote an Indian proverb, which says, what you see is all in grey, just move the elephant. In other terms, there's no single question to it. As a former military, I would describe as a process and a methodology. The process has three dimensions. First of all, we need as military to have our freedom to operate. To operate, it means in military terms, ability to observe, to decide, and to act. The second part of it is obviously to assess how much you are technologically dependent, because the digital transformation make all the things connected, and how far are you depending on technology you don't master. And third part, which is certainly the most important, how do you build trust? Trust means your ability to have core competencies in personal, competent people and on that topic. And maybe there's the core definition of sovereignty, which is the ability to protect your data and the way they are processed. This is a process, and the methodology, it seems to me that if you don't master the technology, you could, from a bottom-up approach, master the bricks of technology you will be using to transform uses.
Okay. Luigi, I would like to ask you about, you have a European perspective, and I think the big question is whether it's too late. Have we lost our European sovereignty in digital? Is it too late to try to fill the gap, or do we still have room to get back this digital sovereignty? Because it's, I think, one of the key issues today.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Just to point out, what you mentioned is my old title. And now I'm Secretary General of the European Cybersecurity Organization, which is the public-private partnership together with everybody, with the European Commission, to build up cybersecurity in Europe. And one of the big issues today, indeed, is what also the mandate of the new commission. They call it technology sovereignty. Nobody knows what the technology sovereignty is. There is no definition. Actually, you mentioned about that digital sovereignty. For me, it's just, first of all, I would say what sovereignty is. Sovereignty is the law of a country and the ability to enforce this law. To enforce this law also means to have the control of digital aspects, of identity aspects, of different kind of economy and so on. Now the question is, your question is, what about Europe? Have we lost sovereignty? The question is actually could be even wider, because in the digital world, there is no more border. Data are going everywhere. And I would say the question is there any definition of sovereignty which still holds with the digital transformation? And actually, I would say that only, for me, in my point of view, there are only two countries which are keeping sovereignty: the US and China. Europe has lost sovereignty. European countries have lost their sovereignty because they've lost part of their data. The question is, how can we recover this partially? Because I think that sovereignty for Europe is lost for, at least concerning data, for a large number of years. If we go alone, if big countries like France, Germany, and so on want to go alone, think they can go alone, it's impossible. They have to work together on specific issues to build some, let's say, strategic autonomy, that's what we say, to increase strategic autonomy on certain sectors, to have certain regulation which help the implementation of the technology that we have. And of course, for doing this, you need a common effort, a political and economic effort. We still have to build that up.
Does it really mean something to talk about digital sovereignty at a national level then?
Digital sovereignty additional, yes, because you can, in a country, there's still a meaning of national sovereignty. You cannot talk today about European sovereignty. There is not such a concept. But national sovereignty, of course, it exists. So national sovereignty on data, you can have sovereign cloud, for instance, what we are discussing these days, to keep certain data in the country. This is very important. Other data should flow away. You still have the free flow of data, which is the base of internet. And this is, I mean, this will exist because it's imposed by the market. But certain sensitive data, I think, will remain in the country, or if there is a political agreement, shared across European countries for building up a beginning of something which maybe in the future could be a European sovereignty.
Just to follow up on that, General, do you agree that with Luigi that we have lost our digital sovereignty in Europe?
I fully agree with that, and the problem to recover asks the question of what we're doing in between, because our goal, when I mentioned that we want to operate really, how can I defeat my enemy? How can I be sure to have the cutting edge of technology to make it? And it is more important than sovereignty itself. In other terms, to be provocative, I don't care to die as a French, national, at the sovereignty level. I want to defeat my enemy. And if I have to, I would say, to assume that I'm partially dependent, for time I don't care. And there's maybe a confusion we must not have between the sovereignty and interoperability, because normally when we used to fight, we're doing with some allies, and that is important as well. And there's all the topics on which I want to be alone, free to operate. The best example is certainly the nuclear deterrence, but for other abilities, we can find a compromise. But I fully support your diagnosis.
Olivier, what's your take on this issue of digital sovereignty being lost to essentially big American
players?
Companies?
Well, first I hope all the demos you can see here show that European companies like Thales, well, we are an international company, but we still have a lot of capabilities in Europe to develop digital products. Here I guess you see something like 40 demos using artificial intelligence. So we have this know-how of using technologies, and using technology is probably the most important thing in digital. You can invent technology, but we should never forget the real question in digital is how to create a new usage, how to deliver a great user experience. And this is part of the sovereignty topic of digital, is do I have the ability to create a great user experience for military people, for, all the people we serve, for you and I every day. Now it's true that in order to deliver those solutions, we leverage a lot of technologies that are coming from companies, big companies from the US and China, also from Europe and from other parts of the world, because there is a notion of digital platform in the digital economy where some players can become very dominant in one domain, because software is scaling very quickly, and so if you have a great product, everybody can use it. It's offered as a service, and so those players are becoming very dominant. And so the question is, do we trust those big players? So the real question of sovereignty at the end of the day is, first, you should have the capability to develop, and I do believe Europe has this capability, a company like Thales, but many other companies, and around the world, in Middle East, in Asia, our customers, they have also, and we help them, this capability. The question is, how much do we trust the techno providers that we use? That's why we believe in some cases we can try to replicate the technologies, but it's very difficult, and I'm sure we'll go back on it in terms of investment, in terms of efforts. To create a new European cloud, it means probably tens of billions of euros of investments if we really want to compete. Now another alternative is to act probably as a trusted partner, where you can put some trusted block inside this technology that gives you back some sovereignty. Okay, maybe not. Maybe there are still some scenarios that you can't escape, and those scenarios, then it's a question: do I accept to live with or without those scenarios? If you don't accept to live with this type of dependency, then you need to invest to replicate the technology. But in a vast majority of cases, you can solve 99% of cases of dependence through a trusted partner role, but the remaining scenarios, you accept them. Like if you do a risk analysis, you always have this type of scenario.
And there are no real alternative then. If you don't trust these parties, then what happens?
If you don't trust, for instance, in the cloud, if you don't trust Amazon or Microsoft or Google or Alibaba and others, so you have two alternatives. The first one is to use another player, European players, and we do have European players like OVH and SAP and others providing cloud capabilities. The truth is probably not at the same level of performance of available services and costs, or you can try to develop your own solution, like a private cloud solution, which may cost you much more. So the question is, do I accept to pay more to have to cut this dependence? And in some cases, will not give you the same level of performance, of scalability, for instance. And so it's back to what General Maurice was saying. I am sovereign, but I have lost an operational advantage, right? So in this case, you believe you are sovereign, but in fact you are not, because you have only solved the technical aspect, not the operational aspect, which is probably the most important one at the end of the day. So the solution at the end is how much effort, investment am I able to put to cut dependencies whenever I do not accept a scenario of dependence because of lack of trust.
I fully agree, but I come back to my previous point: the core sovereignty, which are the datas and the way they're processed. The first thing we should start with.
But how do you do it in the military, for instance?
What do you mean?
To keep these data safe and have no interference with outside powers.
At the moment, given our strategic capabilities, we are doing stovepipes. But if we look at weapon systems, Thales is extremely good at preserving it, and certainly in France they are the best champion, if I could use the word. They're extremely good at using data, protecting them, and especially processing them in real time. And in the planning and decision process, it's very important. In other terms, the first partner I would like to trust with is obviously Thales, and I expect that we could have a kind of chief trust officer, just to within the task force to preserve that the trust we have to build and we have to preserve.
One of the key issues behind this whole discussion about digital sovereignty, of course, is the availability of talents. Because if we don't have the talents in our countries, in Europe, in France and others, then it's going to be difficult to achieve those goals. Do we have these talents, or do you think that?
So we do have very strong talents in Europe, in France in particular, and in fact, if you look at the GAFAs, they are investing a lot in France to grab our talents. And if you go to the Silicon Valley, you will see lots of European people. French software architects and data scientists are well known in the Silicon Valley, for instance. So we do have
it's an issue for European companies too.
So yeah, the question is, how do we keep them, and how do we create more? Because we don't have enough. We have a few of them, of course. We have lots of them, but not enough because we are in such high demand. Today there is a war for talent. And the problem of the war for talent is, of course, the price of those skills is increasing dramatically over time. And the companies that are able to pay this type of money are sometimes the same that are the dominant players in the digital economy. Still, I think as a company as Thales, we are able to attract great talents, and sometimes coming from the GAFAs, they prefer to leave Google and to work in a company like Thales because probably we have ethics and values that are quite important for them. Also, we try to offer probably a better work-life balance than others, which is very important for the new generation. And a diversity of topics, sometimes much, if you work in Thales, you can work in aerospace, in transportation, in defense, in security. If you work in Facebook, you will spend a lot of time putting advertisement in social networks, which is great. But after 2 or 3 years doing that, you may end up somewhere else. But so no, it's a fight. We need to train more people at education level, and companies like us, we are here also to keep those talents, not fighting on money. I can tell you this is a lost battle. But fighting on values, fighting on mission, fighting on work-life balance, these are essential topics to keep people inside the company.
Luigi?
Yes. Well, first of all, we don't know exactly how the digital transformation will bring us with the evolution of jobs in the future. Today, what you are talking about is the top, some of the iceberg, probably the 20% of the digital population that will be hired in the future in the companies, because these are, I mean, you're talking about geeks, about coding people, about those who are making really STEM studies. But in the future, we will have a wide variety of competence which will be needed in the digital transformation. So we have to think also to that kind of job transformation. First point. Second, we see around Europe that there are, well, the West Europe, you have usual traditional companies like Thales and so on, which are hiring or try to keep people here. In East Europe, you see people much more hired by the American companies, which are present there. So somehow we lose automatically, but then these people maybe go to the US and so on. It's a kind of bridge already going there. And the big issue is also that in Europe, education is still a national issue. I mean, each country is organizing its own way the education. So we cannot have a European global view. Maybe we are pushing for an Erasmus, a cyber Erasmus, but we are just the beginning. We are actually, next year, we're trying to start an initiative from school, from the age of 6, from primary school up to 26, just to giving initial information about the threat, the potential threat when kids are using digital, but also to give them to show the opportunity of a career in this domain for cybersecurity. But this is just the beginning. Then also companies like Thales and the others came to us and said, we have to get more organized together, not to go, because everybody, the Thales, the Airbus and so on, they have own initiatives to keep or to foster this young population to follow this domain. But bringing them together is still missing across company, across countries. And unfortunately, we have a huge amount of needs which are not fulfilled. And for this reason also...
Yes, there are some figures at the European level, I believe.
Well, they were saying 350,000 in 5 years, something like this. That's what was the official communication from the Commission. Then these figures are changing every once in a while.
Yeah, but essentially the idea is that we will lack some...
that we will lack. And for this reason also, we started an initiative which is called Women for Cyber, not to be politically correct, but simply because statistically, if we miss 50% of the population in this domain, we will miss 50% of chances to get that number.
General.
Just to comment on the lack, I would like to give the figures given by the Secretary of State to Digital, Mr. Cédric O, who said that currently in France there's a lack of 20,000 jobs, which are unoccupied at the moment. In 2022 will be 200,000, and at over Europe in 2022 it could be around 900,000
in the whole
jobs.
digital...
yeah, in Europe.
Yeah, which is...
My second comment as military, obviously we are concerned with the war of talent. In other terms,
we'll retain talent.
Yeah, to retain talent would be an issue as well. I think we could have a core of specialists, but we'll have to work with a trustful partner and to find a fair balance between, I would say, make or buy, as you say in English, because the operational could be aware of the final objective, but we need more people to support us to code and to make our algorithm sharper, given the threat we're facing.
The three of you talked about trust. A very simple question, but about 5G. To what extent can we trust the suppliers in this field, and in particular Huawei?
I think it's a marvelous example of the opportunity given by technology, but at the same time you have the risk. And we come back to the point. I'm very supportive of the governmental action. We decided to go for Huawei. The problem, you need to have red lines to have guarantees. Are we sure that our data will be protected? That is very important.
And
how can we be sure?
How can we be sure of that?
NC, our National Agency on Security, is working on it, and we have core competencies on that topic. Then the issue is to create the conditions to be sure that things will be operated in regards to our interest. And the second thing is, I come back to my first point, free to operate. We're sure that the operator will be in a position through backdoors to shut off our system. And but if we are able to answer in a positive manner on the issue, it makes sense.
Okay. Well, I simply was discussing with a different head of national security, cybersecurity agency, France, the ANSI or the equivalent in Germany, in Italy, in Belgium, and so on. And they said we cannot be sure. We tested technically all the different 5G components and so on. They didn't find major problem, but I said, but we cannot be sure.
Yeah, but simply. They don't have the same red lines, obviously, between all these countries. If you look at the UK, France,
they don't.
Germany,
each country is looking.
They don't have the same appreciation of the risk.
The risk, but at the end, they say at the end, it's from our technical point of view, we tested it, it's okay, but then it's a political decision whether you take it or not. Somehow coming back to what you were saying, you need operationally. Yeah, operationality, let me say, that you should be satisfied. And then, because I remember there was an interview in Italy of a minister some more than a year ago, something like this, that said, we have to go with Huawei because we cannot allow to remain, to be late,
behind,
to be behind, in the economic sector because we are not using the 5G. That's it. It's a political decision. Then then you have to assume the consequences, whatever they are.
Yeah.
So, more generally speaking, to trust a solution, it's a complex topic. How do you trust a product? When you take an Airbus, why do you trust it? The first reason is because of history. History has shown you that you can trust this equipment. There's never been an example where data have leaked or stuff like that. So it's not a great trust, but it gives you a certain level of trust. If history has shown you that this provider is trustable, has never compromised your data, for instance, it gives you a certain level of trust. The second level of trust is when you can audit the product. You can audit it deeply, not only the product, but even the process that has been used to build this product. But of course,
in this case, is it possible?
No. So in many cases, companies will refuse to audit in detail their process and their product because they will see it as a way, of course, to grab their technologies, right? So you can perform a certain level of audit either in a black box mode. You take a product, you test the product from the outside, and you try to detect any abnormality, or a white box. Of course, white box will give you better trust than a black box test. The third level of trust you can get is by asking the equipment provider to give you access to some key components of its product and to say, I'm going to replace those components by mine. So that even if you can get my data, I will have encrypted those data with my own keys, for instance. So you can put a certain level of building blocks inside the product that will give you back a better level of trust. So this is typically in Thales what we do when we use a cloud coming from AWS or Microsoft, for instance. We will use our own identity and authentication management module. We can use our own encryption algorithm. We can use our own keys. So you can replace some elements of the solution that will give you back some trust. So this is the role of trusted partner in a way, when you can leverage the best of existing technologies and replace it with some parts that are critical in terms of trust are replaced to give you back trust. Bon, and the last level is despite everything I've said before, you still don't trust. You think the remaining risks are too high, and so in this case, you will use the Nokia Ericsson.
You
5G.
Look for alternatives.
Of course.
Yeah.
And, so,
and they are.
Of course. And we, even in Europe, we have alternatives building up. So that's, of course, a great way to manage trust.
Yeah.
Well, trust, just to say, because to recover trust is just what we said before, to recover sovereignty. There are the two goes along.
The main issue is, and I'm very supportive of the proactive process Olivier has defined. What am I doing in between? When you say that Nokia and Ericsson could catch up the technology of Huawei, what are we doing now? And I cannot accept to downgrade our quality of services because I want the best to defeat my enemy. I come back to my previous point.
We talked a little bit about cloud. You've seen this initiative in Germany where Chancellor Merkel asked for German sovereign cloud, and it's not very clear whether their idea is to build a European cloud or if it's a German version.
I think she said a European cloud based on
that's
German
what she said, yeah. But
yes.
What do you think of this initiative? And more broadly speaking, do you think that in Europe we can try to build a European solution or alternative to Amazon and the others?
So as I've said at the beginning, we we already have some cloud players in Europe. To be very blunt, they are not providing the same level of quality of service, availability, scalability around the world, and so on, and number of services than the big dominant players. So if we want to build a European cloud for Europe, but I guess here we have people from other continents that have the same concern of building their own cloud. It means for sure a political alignment now that all European countries should align to invest in one player. Today what I see is Germany wants to build a European cloud using SAP and T-Systems, and France is willing to build a European cloud using OVH and Dassault Systèmes. I'm sure Italy will soon announce a European cloud based on Italian technologies. So if that's the way we go,
initiatives, but not European.
Not European, and I'm afraid national initiatives will face difficulties in terms of funding. Looking at the amounts that are needed, there's been attempts already in the past, and even Thales was part of it in one of the attempts called CloudWatt. There was Numergy, another one, and they failed because then you realize the level of investment needed to provide a good quality of service is such that it's very difficult to do it at national level.
So is it still possible to do something at this
that's
in this area, do you think, or
because
is it too late? And
what I'm hearing, because traveling around Europe, I hear, I was 2 days ago in Frankfurt, and I've been told that investment foreseen for Germany are 20 million euros for this. 20 million peanuts for doing this. I think France tried with 50 millions, but was by largely not sufficient. And also within Germany, when you speak to different ministries, the point of view are different. So even without a country, there are different point of view. So you can imagine building up something in Europe, but something maybe could be done if we well focus the target, maybe not to pretend to make a European cloud to compete with the Americans, with Microsoft and so on. If we focus really for the sovereign data, say we want to build something which really can keep data in the country, can manage data in the country for Germany, for France, for the key. Then, indeed, it should be a political agreement on this. There should be enough investment on this. And then we can build up a kind of, call it whatever you want to call it, this big European effort for, call it Galileo if you like it, call it well, whatever. This European approaches. And then it could work, maybe, but really focusing on some specific area, not pretend to make the competition with the non-European clouds, just putting a few millions on the table.
Yes.
You're skeptical, no?
No, I was thinking what we need is also, I think we miss our Jeff Bezos or our Satya Nadella here to create a cloud. So probably it depends also on some entrepreneurs that have this vision. And there is no example today of big cloud providers that did not start with a very strong application or a very strong service. Like Amazon Web Service came after the Amazon Marketplace. Azure came after Microsoft Office 365. Google Cloud Platform came after the search engine, and so on and so forth. Alibaba, it's because of the marketplace. So first, I think Europe should invest in one player that have already a very strong usage on one service, because to develop a great cloud, you need a lot of usage. So what is the European application today that brings the more usage? This should be the key question. And do we have the right entrepreneur to create a cloud based on this usage? This would be the way to go if I was operating in Europe.
Sorry, just to say, because that's very. This is one of the key issue. I think it's really the usage, and the usage. If you really focus the control of data, you focus on public administration, where sensitive data, and critical infrastructure data, because those also you cannot throw it away wherever. So, and then for public administration, then maybe there should be some regulations allow to say you have to use this kind of technology. Then automatically you support the companies which are developing those kind of technology, those kind of solutions. But if you leave it open to market rules, you will never go.
And as you say, it's not only here we are talking about general purpose cloud, but we can have dedicated cloud for given application, like military applications. So I think developing a dedicated cloud environment for military application is absolutely feasible. What is more difficult is to fight today for general purpose cloud, where dominant players are so big that trying to fight them will be a very, very difficult battle.
Obviously, I fully agree. In military terms, I would say choose our battles, and the one you mentioned are very critical.
By the way, we mentioned trust a lot, but is it really safe for the French military to use Palantir as one of its suppliers of solutions?
We are not. We're not. You know, 2 years ago I went to the US, and it was one of my pleasures to see Palantir, just to be a bit provocative. But at the moment, they are the best at doing some jobs. I understand that Airbus is using Palantir, and I understand that the DGAC, our homes service in intelligence, is working, and they mentioned that they have preserved us from terrorist attack, and I believe them. And if you have no alternative, I come back to a point I already mentioned. I want to have the cutting edge to defeat my enemy. But I went and visited DGAC, and they explained to me that they defined red lines and they create conditions of guarantees just to be sure that our data are not going to the US, and I trust DGSI.
So far, so good. I would like to open up for questions. If you have, I don't know if there are microphones in the room. Yes. No question. Don't hesitate. Yes.
I've got a question.
Sorry.
You have to know that this conference has been broadcasted on YouTube, and I have a question from Canada. How do we prevent monopolies? This question could be for you, Luigi.
Actually, well, I would actually go the other way around, because when you look in Brussels, the G competition has not allowed in the recent past some convergence of large European companies to create European champions. Talking about Siemens and Alstom, for instance. Well, I don't want to say that this would be a monopoly, but the question is really, it's really important to grow competition within Europe, or to create a critical mass which is large enough for certain companies to be a real global player at world level. And then the monopoly in the cyber, the digital world, there is no monopoly. It's going so fast, is moving, is changing, and so on. There is no monopoly at all, apart from, well, you can say GAFAM and so on. That's a kind of. But indeed, that's the point. We are not there. We are not there. So we have to do something. And I mean, the question is coming from Canada, but it's true for all around the world. And Europe is just a small part of it.
Another question? No? Yeah.
Bonjour, Michel Mariton from University Paris-Saclay. You mentioned the need of talents, and I'd like to share the experience, the reality at the university today. If I view the university as a machine, as a factory, which is going to produce talents for cyber, our main difficulty today is that we do not have enough professors, not enough seniors to produce these students, to be serious about training them. So when I hear Thales saying it's difficult to compete in terms of salaries to high engineers against the GAFA, you can imagine how much more difficult it is for university. So this was the comment. If we do not have the professors, the senior researchers, we are going to kill the chicken. and not get the eggs, if I can use this example, this image for a student. So this comment being made, I'd like to ask the question to the panel about their view, how us, universities, schools, could do better in preparing experts for them.
Just, going your way. You know, that was something like 2 years ago, Germany, the Bundeswehr, University of Bundeswehr Munich, they had something like 17 million euro to bring along professors, something like 12 professors. It took something more than 1.5 years to find them, even with the money there. So this is a real issue. And also when we try to scale down, what I mentioned this 350,000 whatever experts in 5 years, we try to make a simulation to say, okay, maybe we can find them, but we don't find the professor in the time, in the right time. We don't find the professor. This is a real issue. So I don't have the answer how we can find the professor, but indeed, we have to first of all teach the teacher.
And probably we already do it in Thales a lot, but we can do probably better is to use also experts from the industry to come and deliver for free, conferences and to students. I think it's also very important but you already do it a lot, but to embed students during their training in industry, developing real applications, leveraging their know-how, because this is also a great way to learn. So industry also, of course, is partly accountable for improving the situation.
Yes.
And maybe one comment also is we need not only when we think digital, we think of data scientists, experts in IoT, blockchain, and the likes. We need also designers. We need people that are expert in user experience. This type of profile we never mention. These are absolutely critical in the digital economy. And we struggle to find them also, the good ones, I mean. So.
Sir.
Sorry.
Good afternoon. I'm Gabriele Gambarara from Elettronica, working in aerospace and defense. I would like just a clarification, because what we are discussing has two aspects. One is the civil aspect of protection of data for privacy, anti-fraud, and so on. So there is the market of citizens that need to have safe use of the new technology. The other one is the defense and military application. So when we speak about level of investment, who is defining the level of priorities to ensure security through sovereignty in the civil aspect of our society and the military one? The European countries has been asked to raise the level of investment of 2% of the PIL in defense. That means 100 billion euro per year in more assets. And one fighter is costing more or less 100 million euro. So who is the organization that has to bring at national level and then European maybe the level of information to take right decision? Do we have to protect ourselves in our civil life and military and defense issues, and to which level? Because money is important, but I think there are other issues and priorities to be defined. So who has the responsibility to bring the level of awareness in the political arena on this aspect to such a level to allow the right level of investment to be employed? Thank you.
Well, I can maybe say something for the civilian sector. This is a real issue, a very big issue, because first of all, the investments that we are doing in Europe are really insufficient. We call it seed money to mature the situation, because even if when we are discussing with the European Commission now, the next budget from 2021, they're envisaging to put in cybersecurity something like 2 billion or maybe 3 if you consider also research in 7 years, which are peanuts from what really should be done. So it's seed money. But then the Commission is thinking to use this money to develop or to support European policies according to their point of view. Their point of view. They want to develop things that when we discuss with our member in EXO, priority, what is your market priority, your economic, we don't recognize the same things, maybe 50% to be honest, okay. But then this means that the Commission will, and now the Commission tomorrow, by the way, in Brussels, there's a meeting between the Commission, experts from certain companies, and member states, and Commission wants to convince member states to invest in their view of the market, which you can imagine what is the Commission understanding of the market. I don't want to say more, to be politically correct. But this is the point. They are investing public money on their priorities, which is European policies, but really, and then they say, oh, but we are supporting industry, we are supporting the economy, the competitiveness. And this is the point. And this is our work now of EXO, what we try to say, hold on. The real market, the real economy, the company like Thales and so on, and the banks and the transport sector and the energy are asking for something else because they need something now. So please start using what you have already today on your competence and use it first, and then with the other money try to develop what is really priority. But we discuss together what are the priorities, because industry, if national public administration is defining what is sovereign for the country, is the industry will produce those technologies.
Sir, you had a question.
Yves Lagoud from Thales. It's more a comment than a question, actually. Coming back to the sovereign cloud issue, I do share the idea first that a European sovereignty is a concept that is a bit fluffy, and I don't think that French officials would completely agree with the wording, but digital autonomy is pretty clear. Now, when Europe decided to invest in Galileo, that was a question of sovereignty. That was the question of if our American friends cut the signal, we are left with nothing in terms of localization capabilities. And we are talking about 10, 15 billion euros investment for Galileo. So why shouldn't there be a sort of investment, and probably less, because we are not talking, as Olivier said, we are not talking about competing with AWS and Azure and all that, but we would be talking probably about a specific cloud for specific services in defense and security. Don't you think that it is not a matter of investment and of money, but basically a matter of political will?
Yes, partly. Yes, for sure. And Galileo is a great example, as you've mentioned, where there is strong political alignment. We deliver great results. And by the way, the GPS is a great example of a technology that is used even in defense because it provides a lot of operational services. But probably not in the most sensitive part of the defense protection. So based on scenarios, we can look at. Now, every time you say, I'm going to develop a cloud that is only dedicated to a certain portion, it means the level of usage will be lower. If the level of usage will be lower, it means probably the service you will provide will be of poor quality. That's a fact. If this service is of poor quality, it means people using this service will pay more to run this service on your cloud than if they use it on another cloud. And so the question is not only how do we develop this infrastructure, is how do we help the ecosystem move to this infrastructure? How do we incentivize them to use this new infrastructure to make sure at the end it will be successful? I think this is one part that was missing in previous attempts to create a sovereign cloud, which was we are creating the infrastructure, people will come, but there was no real incentive for people to move to this infrastructure.
Well, if it is sensitive, there should be regulations.
Yes, it's one possible incentive is regulation. Now you will need to solve the economical aspect of if using your service on this cloud costs you twice as much money as another cloud, it means it will create a lack of competitiveness in this industry. So
Called
this is something
state
to
aid.
look at.
It is called state aid, and
Yes.
it can work.
Yes.
General, to reach this.
Yeah, there's a geopolitical dimension on your question, obviously. Two things, two comments. First of all, I would quote Winston Churchill: "Nations have no friends; they only have interest." Can we have one interest in doing the business? The key questions. And to give a partial answer, I think in Europe, regarding countries, there's a lack of, I would say, strategic maturity, and few countries, I won't name them, have an idea of the complexity of the world and the responsibility they want to play. And I'm afraid it's not shared within all the European countries. I try to be diplomatic.
Yes.
Still on YouTube, I've got a question from Germany. How can we use the open source ecosystem to enhance our capabilities?
That's a question for Olivier, I know.
No, I didn't ask the question. No, I love open source. No, open source, if we are back to the definition of sovereignty, open source gives you a great asset, which is capability to operate. You have the source code available, so you don't have the risk of an editor telling you, I'm cutting the service, and now you cannot operate your service anymore. So you have the software, so it means you can build the software, and so you can run your service. So it gives you first thing. Second level of asset it brings to you is auditability. I was saying trust is audit is level 2 of trust, and you can audit the open source code. Now, if we are very transparent, auditing software source code from open source, now we have open sources that accounts tens of millions of lines of code. The capability to audit tens of millions of lines of code to detect potential backdoors into this software is a complex question, and not so many companies can claim they have this capability to detect backdoors in open source, especially in open source software that is moving all the time. And the third dimension, coming back to your definition, General, which is trust. Definitely, you cannot trust people building the software in an open source community. I mean, the main contributors to the open source communities today are the GAFAs and are the Chinese companies. So if you look at OpenStack, for instance, which is a well-known open source to compete for cloud providers, one of the main community of contribution in OpenStack is China. So
we come back to the initial question.
So we come back to the initial question. And the capability to operate open source distribution in the long run is a complex question. Very few companies in the world know how to do it. And the problem is most of them are American. The most famous one is called Red Hat. It's been bought by IBM for $34 billion a few months ago. It shows you that the capability to operate open source distribution is a complex know-how. So in fact, I would say, yes, open source brings you real value and asset for sovereignty, but it's not, I'm sorry to say, the golden bullet that will solve your problem of sovereignty. It's a more complex topic.
Another last question. Yes, sir. Over there.
You say that we have difficulties investing in Europe and in France in cyber security. Sorry, I'm sick. But was there any estimates made by the French military or maybe the European countries to know how much we lost to security breaches, to corporate espionage or things like that?
General?
I have no answer, and if I had the answer, it would be classified. But we are doing our best to be as operational and as secure as possible, and we have Cyber Command and very competent people working closely with ANSI. I think in other terms, the task force is well managed to do its best, but there's nothing else I can do.
Well, there are figures which are coming out regularly from the editor, for instance, of antivirus, Symantec and friends, which are saying that actually the préjudice en français, let's say the loss, the global loss for this cyber attack is higher than the drug problem. So it's higher than 700 billion euro, dollar, whatever you want. But there is no precise, actually last figures is more for 1,000 billion per year. So that's what I say. So if you compare with investment, when I was talking about 3 billion in Europe in 7 years, and you consider that typically the European value is 10 times lower than what is investing per year in US or in China, well, you just make a comparison. Well, usually there is also another figure when you usually take an insurance. You take an insurance of something like 1% max of the value of what you. So if you take an insurance of 1% of 1,000 billion, you have 10 billion overall. That's what should be spent per year as an insurance.
It should be a good investment then. Right. Is there a last question or? Yes, over here. Yeah. So.
Yes, Marco Zaccaria, Shoreline Holding. I have a question. We've been talking about United States, China, Europe. What about the rest of the world? How do those guys move? I mean, there's Africa, there's Southeast Asia. Is there any forecast? Because this is also a huge market, theoretically.
Well, I don't know, maybe Thales can talk about the market. I would say that Russia and India India is expected to be a future market and future also player. Russia is quite an autarky system, which could develop in a more sovereign way, let me say. But for the moment, even if everybody is afraid of Russia, of Putin, and so on, actually Russia, by the words that we had in our last board of directors in Helsinki from a diplomat from Finland, he said, actually Russia is more in a defense mode. It's not in attack mode with respect to other countries, let me say. So Russia shouldn't be a major concern, threat if you want, for the near future. India maybe will be much more seen as an open market. Concerning Africa and South America, maybe you could take.
So I cannot answer globally. It's a complex question, but basically we see some countries indeed like India, Israel, Russia, I don't know, but probably yes, have the willingness to develop very core sovereign capabilities, and they have this know-how. Other countries, like we found in most countries, in fact, today we see new regulations coming, where countries are asking, for instance, for data protection, like if you put data on the cloud, they should be located in a data center located within the country, and you should prove that. These type of regulations. So there is not necessarily a willingness to compete or a dream to compete somehow with the web giants, but some regulations are coming in order to protect their sensitive assets. What can move to the cloud? What cannot move to the cloud? What should be encrypted? Which encryption? Who are the keys? Where physically the data centers are located? So we see it coming in many countries around the world, in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia, in many countries. Also, they ask sometimes for hybrid cloud solutions so that you are not totally dependent on one provider. You run on multiple environments to ensure resilience. So this type of regulations are coming more and more in many places.
Well, thank you all for your questions, and thank you for this very open discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. On n'est pas beaucoup. Je viens de vous faire fan, hein, moi je l'écoute souvent et je vous lis beaucoup. Ouais, je pense qu'on est dans le fond. J'espère. Ouais, finalement, vous aviez raison, commençons par une définition basique opérationnelle. Ça permet après de remettre les choses en Pardon? Ah bon? Et que vous aimez bien? Oui, bien sûr. Ah bon, c'est le principal.